Well, first, thanks for the opportunity. It's been a fabulous AVCA. So we've been first most grateful to be present for such an epic moment. As for your question, we are graced with the opportunity to invest in these underserved sectors that you've listed, be it technology, entertainment, or sport. For us, the mean to improve the transformation on the continent comes from the connecting tissues between these sectors from our lens. From our lens, we think that technology, especially fintech companies, sports or entertainment are tech-enabled businesses that allow you to identify businesses that are able to capture growing pool of exportable or export-oriented revenue. And by that, specific example is most of the fintech companies that are today unicorn or that are covered on the news are companies that tend to have a significant activity of remittances. And the remittances is them coming into the space that used to be occupied by companies like Western Union, MoneyGram, and what you do is moving FX. There's significant defensibility in being in that activity. If you take now the movies we back, actually so far they're all Nigerian production houses. Production costs are in Naira, but when they sell to Netflix or Amazon, it's in dollars. So I don't need to go into the detail of the benefit of that situation. In sports, we have a basketball team that competes in the American NBA, who pays the participant in dollars. And we've also participated in the Chinese basketball similar league called CBA. They also paid us in dollars, not renminbi. And we've also played in the US, same situation. So you are in this, you can see a trend. We also have a fashion company called Armando Cabral in New York. It does Africa-oriented clothes, but quite modern. And the appeal goes to having Afrobeat singers wearing them, business people wearing it, Hollywood actors wearing them, and it's paid in dollars. The guy is in Broadway and has Saks Fifth Avenue promoting his brand. So you can see the point there. We believe that technology is that very unique sector that allow Africa resident businesses to export themselves to the world. We would often say at the office that if we had to buy a hashtag, it would be buying businesses from Africa to the world. But that option is not there. You would notice that the current tariff war does not include services. If you're exporting goods, then you have an issue because it's fundamentally a manufacturer and a physical component. But most of these services, when you think about it, they're TV content, stories, people performing a sports, not in their geography, but in our geography. So if you think about if you boil down the services of Google, which is one of the most exported service in the world, it's an American company, but we all consume it. There's nothing physical landing. And that's a lot of trillions of dollars, ultimately. So I think there's an unspoken war going on the service space, and we need to be relevant. Today, every single talent in sport, whether you look athletic runners, basketball players, soccer players, tennis, you go through the list, you have a growing and undeniable dominance of African exporting themselves. Even in MMA and fighting, UFC, Francis Ngannou, Israel, the Nigerian. So you can see that the talent is in the continent and it's exporting them itself. However, the value for the sector is in a company that's outside the continent. Most of the time, if you hang around African bars, African lounges, African families, you find people arguing about Arsenal versus Manchester. In the meantime, the fight and the argument is not happening in any of those cities, or Liverpool. Sometimes the person arguing never left the country. Bizarre. Why are they not arguing about a local team? That's a serious problem. So in terms of value, if we were starting to invest and have teams locally, not to mean that the argument will be localized, but there would be a value set that has a local resonance. So that in itself is a problem. The only spaces you find local brands and sport being celebrated by locals are in a big way, at least at volume, at scale, and in economic proportion. It's South Africa and Egypt. And maybe a couple of more North African countries. But when you go to Middle Africa, most of the time, you find cousins of ours talking about teams that are not on the continent. So that has to be fixed, because when it's fixed, it means that you have an entity that, irrespective, is a fiction, that commands value, commands dollars, commands recurrence of economic deployment from consumers. Currently, that economic deployment from consumers goes offshore in multiple ways. So just from the simple fact of retracting that value back home will help the economy. Second, it would also allow you to re-import your talent, because there is no benefit most of the time for the talent to subtract themselves from a European soccer tournament or an American basketball tournament to come and play in a local tournament, because in this local tournament, the economics for that individual is a microscope compared to what he gets there. So there's no amount of cultural guilt you can put onto that person to get him to change his mind, because numbers are stubborn. So for that reason, I think doing more work at that level will carry benefit. The other is when you create better infrastructures, more international tournament will come. As we know in the case of Nigeria, we have a team from South Africa. The NBA has been created, NBA Africa has been created 5 years ago. Nigeria is one of the biggest amount of immigrants playing in the NBA. However, the tournament happens in Senegal, Morocco, Egypt, South Africa, Kigali, Rwanda, but not in Nigeria. Why? Because they did not find a stadium to meet the specs. So you can see how all that money that the country is missing over the last 5 years, while by default, Nigeria should have been in the set. So all that to say that getting infrastructure around sport will bring more money, more talent, but will create an embedded new economy that will stay here, and more GDP collection. So the board roles I take, that those you've listed are a lot of them personal, but there's a set of roles that we take all members of the team because of our portfolio company. So we are really, our day-to-day job is really improving governance of companies, and in cases like the one you've listed, whether it's the MIT Legatum Advisory Board or the Global Sports Summit, or FEDA, which is the $1 billion private equity firm of my former employer, Afrexim Bank, are basically places where, irrespective, you find a great amount of network of either capital pools or parties that have an interest for emerging market and significantly more about Africa. So at the end of the day, whether you are in a board or in a company that have an international lens that allow occupancy or greater space for Africa, in our view, it's important to be in those spaces because the continent has systematically lacked proper representation since it exists. At Silverbacks, we believe that every continent has a story and every continent has issues. We keep on looking at some continent like they're perfect, not understanding that the story is made perfect. A perfect continent does not exist. So we believe that representing Africa properly is important. So being in those spaces is crucial for the interaction it allows us to be part of and for the output that they can create. In the case of FEDA, it's obviously Africa focus. So it's a role that is of legacy, but for the international one, for us is being in spaces where sports is discussed or media is discussed or technology is discussed, where we can really give a proper space and voice to the continent. Because we think that Africa has always been performing. It's just not been heard well. Well, I've been attending the AVCA conference maybe for somewhere between 2 decades and 3. So it feels a bit each time, like I was discussing with a friend of mine called Raj, like going back to a class reunion, where you have the younger class and the old class. And during the reunion, it's always interesting to return, reconnect with old friends, reconnect with old faces, and then discover some new ones. What's most interesting and exciting about this year is the amount of new faces that have come into the different industries, pillars, but at a very interesting intersection. First, Lagos being one of the most vibrant cities, if not the most vibrant. I have deep affinity to this place because I've lived here, I have some family here, my wife is from here. But most importantly, this is the year where we're in the middle of turmoil across the globe. Tariff wars, actual physical wars, and also instability on many political spheres. Yet the continent, during all this carnage and this chaos, has just registered doubling the FDI going into the continent, doubling the private capital money as per AVCA numbers to $4 billion of private capital coming when every other continent has retracted. And also getting the remittances coming from immigrants crossing $100 billion US. So while the world is retracting, the dollars flowing into the continent are increasing or doubling. Imagine the paradox of that. So this couldn't be a better year to regroup with the parties that partake in private capital investing, to redesign strategies, reassess, and decide on the future we want to see for the continent, realizing that it's not always a bad thing to be decoupled, and realizing that when there's a crisis, one should not waste it.